Hello, Chosen One. Thank you for showing up today, not just with your time, but with your spirit. Thank you for making space for the truth that is about to meet you. And if you've honored this message by supporting it with a super thanks, may your seed be multiplied in ways only heaven can calculate. Because support like yours doesn't just move algorithms, it moves destinies. Now let's speak plainly. You didn't land here by coincidence. You didn't stumble upon these words because of curiosity or boredom. You were guided here. And not everyone made it. Not everyone was meant to. There are spiritual forces that work to keep you from hearing this exact message. Distractions, delays, emotional heaviness, all designed to stop this moment from unfolding. And yet, here you are. You're not just watching, you're awakening. If this message finds you busy or multitasking, pause it now, hit save, come back when you're still, because what you are about to receive only unlocks its full power in silence, focus, and surrender. This message is not a video. This is a mirror, a key, a call, and it will only work for those bold enough to hear it to the end. Now, before we begin, let me ask you something that your spirit already knows the answer to. Why have you always felt like something about you was different, but you could never explain it? Why have your earliest memories held more weight than most people's defining moments? Why have people tried over and over again to define you, to shrink you, to silence you, even before you ever spoke a word of truth? Because the truth about you was never lost. It was hidden so well that even you forgot. But this is the moment heaven scheduled for remembrance. And now, what was concealed must rise. Let's begin. You were never forgotten. You were hidden, and not because you were weak, but because your power was too real, too raw, too prophetic to be exposed before it was time. From the moment you entered this world, something in you was different. You asked questions before others even learned how to obey. You sensed lies before they had language. You felt the pain in rooms others found comfortable, and they called it strange. They called it too much, but it was never too much. It was too true for the world to hold without trembling. They didn't just overlook your light. They tried to rewrite your identity before you had a chance to claim it. From childhood, you were labeled too sensitive, too quiet, too deep, too emotional. But those were never flaws. They were signals, early indicators that you'd been encoded with something rare, something heaven-born, something uncopyable. And the people who felt it, even if they didn't know what to name it, tried to dim it, not because they hated you, but because they feared what they didn't understand. You were a mirror, and mirrors terrify those who are committed to illusion. So what did they do? They tried to teach you how to shrink, how to settle, how to hide in plain sight, how to call your intuition overthinking, how to see your silence as weakness, how to define your empathy as emotional instability. But what they were really trying to do, whether they knew it or not, was erase your access to the power inside you before you discovered what that power was for. And for a while, it worked. You second-guessed the whispers in your spirit. You tried to ignore the weight in your chest when something felt wrong. You looked for belonging in rooms that had no capacity to understand what you carried. You confused survival for identity. You wore masks just to feel safe. You dimmed your light to make others feel comfortable, all while wondering deep down, why does this still feel like betrayal? Because it was, but not betrayal by others, betrayal of yourself. And now you're beginning to see what really happened. You're realizing that the dreams, the memories, The chills that ran down your spine in moments no one else noticed, they weren't random. They were codes, messages encoded into your journey, keys hidden in plain sight. You always knew there was more. You always sensed you were different, not better, not superior, but chosen. And chosen ones? We don't get loud instructions. We get internal awakenings. We get sudden clarity in the middle of chaos. We get dreams that make no sense until years later. We get silence so loud that it recalibrates everything inside us. And that's what has begun in you. You're not crazy. You're not lost. You're not broken. You are remembering. You are remembering what they tried to make you forget. You are remembering why you never fit the mold. You are remembering why you questioned everything you were told to blindly accept. And now the real story begins, not the one they wrote about you, the one that was always hidden underneath their definitions, the story that heaven never erased, the story that still carries your original frequency, the story you were born to live. They didn't just try to distract you, they tried to erase you, slowly, quietly, methodically, not by destroying your body but by clouding your mind. They planted ideas in you so subtly that you mistook them for your own, ideas that made you question your worth, ideas that turned your strengths into burdens, ideas that made you shrink before you even stood tall. They wrapped their insecurities in compliments and handed them to you as truth. They taught you that dreaming was dangerous, that being different was lonely, that wanting more made you ungrateful, that knowing more made you arrogant. And because your heart was pure, you believed them. Because your spirit was open, you let their voices override your own. You silenced the part of you that was trying to roar. You called your power pride. You called your intuition confusion. You called your sensitivity weakness. But deep down, something in you never fully surrendered. Something always whispered back, "This is not who I really am." And that whisper was truth. You were never wrong for sensing what others ignored. You were never out of place for seeing through their performance. You were never too intense. You were just unwilling to live a numb life. And that refusal scared them. So they tried to teach you how to bend, how to water yourself down, how to doubt what you saw, how to pretend you didn't feel everything so deeply. But no matter how many masks you tried on, none of them fit. No matter how many roles you played, none of them satisfied. Because you weren't created to perform, you were created to pierce. Your presence was always meant to challenge what was false. That's why they tried to beat you to the punch. They wanted to confuse your identity before it ever had a chance to emerge. If they could make you small, they could remain large. If they could make you quiet, they could remain unchallenged. If they could convince you to doubt yourself, they would never have to face themselves. But that was their mistake. Because truth doesn't die. Truth waits. Truth watches. Truth survives. And now the truth is rising again inside you. And with it comes fire. With it comes vision. With it comes the clarity they worked so hard to keep from you. And once that clarity arrives, the illusion can no longer stand. That's what's happening now. The masks are cracking, the fog is lifting, the lies are melting off your life like ash in the wind. You're beginning to feel the weight of every false narrative that never belonged to you. You're no longer afraid to admit that what they told you about yourself was not true. You're no longer trying to earn validation from people who needed your silence more than your truth. You're no longer available for manipulation disguised as love. You are seeing, you are awakening, and you are reclaiming every piece of yourself that was scattered by fear, shame, and control. And that reclamation, that's power. The kind of power that doesn't shout. It simply stands. It stands in rooms that used to intimidate you. It stands in front of people who used to define you. It stands in front of mirrors and finally recognizes what was always there. Someone who was never broken, just buried. And now that you are remembering, you can never go back. You will never again pretend to be someone you're not, to make others comfortable. You will never again sacrifice your vision to maintain someone else's illusion. You will never again dim your discernment just to stay connected. You've seen too much. You've felt too much. You've grown too much. And now you are becoming too much, not for your destiny, but for the boxes that were never built to contain you. What they tried to hide from you was your own face, but the mirror has returned, and this time you're not looking away. You were never without direction. The signs were always there. You just didn't know how to read them yet. Childhood wasn't random. The patterns you noticed, the emotions you felt too deeply, the questions you asked when no one else dared, none of that was meaningless. Those moments were coded. Every strange dream, every unexplained sense of danger, every sentence someone said that stuck to your memory like it was etched in stone. They were breadcrumbs from heaven, scattered along your path to keep you from forgetting who you truly are. You were never just a quiet child. You were an observer, a discerner, a soul whose spiritual senses were activated before your language could explain what you saw. While others laughed, you felt things. While others played without worry, you picked up on energy that didn't match the words in the room. You saw cracks in smiles. You heard what wasn't being said. You cried when others laughed, not because you were broken, but because your heart responded to what was hidden. And they told you it was imagination. They told you to toughen up. They told you to stop being dramatic. But what they were really saying was, we don't understand you, and that scares us. So they tried to label what they couldn't decode. They tried to pathologize what was actually a prophetic instinct. They tried to frame your sensitivity as weakness, when in truth it was the early sign that you were built to see in a world that only teaches people how to look. You weren't overreacting. You were spiritually accurate. You weren't too deep. You were just speaking from a place most people are afraid to explore. And the discomfort they felt around you wasn't because you did something wrong. It was because your awareness made them feel exposed. Even as a child, your presence held a mirror, and people who are not ready to face themselves will always fear the one who reflects them. But you didn't know that. So you turned your light inward. You tried to become normal. You tried to shut off the signals. You tried to belong. And in doing so, you walked away from your map. But the map never disappeared. It waited. It pulsed inside your dreams. It whispered in your quiet moments. It stirred when you passed certain places. It reawakened every time your soul encountered a frequency that matched your origin. And now you're beginning to trace those patterns again. You're beginning to realize why that dream never left, why that moment keeps repeating, why you still remember what most people have long forgotten. Because those weren't memories. They were instructions. They were embedded truth. And now that you're no longer denying your own awareness, those instructions are beginning to light up again. This is why your perception is sharpening, why your senses are returning, why you're suddenly connecting dots that were once scattered. You're not just healing, you are remembering your map. And that map was always spiritual first. It was never meant to make sense to the logical mind. It was designed to awaken your spirit and shake you free from the programming that was never meant for you. And now that the remembering has begun, you are being pulled into places you don't recognize with your eyes, but your soul calls it home. These places are not physical. They are frequencies, conversations, people, spaces that vibrate with familiarity, even though your history says you've never been there. You are stepping into alignment, and alignment always begins with recognizing the signs you once dismissed. Now, the questions you asked as a child no longer feel out of place. Now, the emotions you used to apologize for are starting to feel like superpowers. Now, the intuition you buried beneath logic is roaring back to life. Because the universe didn't forget who you are. Heaven never left you behind. You just needed time to come back to the knowing that was built into your bones. And now that you're listening, everything is starting to speak. You've spent so much of your life apologizing for the very things that made you powerful. You were told your silence was weakness. Your depth was heaviness. Your distance was coldness. But those labels were never true. They were simply the language of people who could not access your frequency. You were always different, and that difference wasn't a defect. It was the design. You were born marked, set apart, divinely coded to carry a vibration that disrupts the ordinary. And because the world did not know what to do with what you carried, it tried to make you doubt that you had ever carried anything at all. But that doubt is dying now. The fog is lifting. You are starting to see your own reflection for what it truly is, a mirror of heaven's intentionality. You were not created to blend. You were created to break patterns. You were not born to mimic the masses. You were designed to redefine what's possible. That discomfort you've carried for years wasn't dysfunction, it was distinction. The pain you felt growing up wasn't rejection, it was redirection. You weren't exiled, you were protected. And now that you're rising, everything they tried to shame you for is beginning to look like proof. Proof that you were never built for common ground. Proof that your sensitivity is spiritual radar. Proof that your intensity is holy fire. Proof that your detachment from surface-level things was not disinterest. It was a sign that your soul was allergic to falsehood. This is why they couldn't control you. This is why they tried to box you in. This is why they told you to be quiet, to be normal, to be like everyone else. Because the moment you stood fully in your authenticity, the illusions surrounding them would collapse. And now, they're beginning to. Because you no longer flinch when they call you too much. You no longer shrink when they call you weird. You no longer try to explain your energy to people who are committed to staying asleep. You've outgrown the need to be understood. You've matured beyond the urge to please. Now you recognize your difference for what it has always been, a divine assignment. And with that recognition comes a new kind of posture. The posture of someone who no longer apologizes for being electric in a world that prefers things dull and manageable. You were never called to dim your light so others wouldn't feel blinded. You were called to shine until the ones ready to awaken are drawn by your brilliance. You were never designed to speak in ways that comfort deception. You were born to be a voice that shakes systems, even if your tone is soft. You don't need to be loud, you only need to be aligned, because alignment speaks, alignment radiates, alignment rearranges the room, and now that you are no longer rejecting your difference, that alignment is unlocking. The power that once scared you is now becoming the reason you walk with your head held high. The intuition that once made you question your sanity is now your compass. The fire that once felt like isolation is now your sanctuary. You are no longer trying to erase the parts of you that don't fit the mold. You've remembered the truth. You were never meant to fit a mold. You were sent to melt it. They tried to make you believe your heart was a liability. That caring too much made you weak. That feeling too deeply would get you hurt. That empathy was a flaw you needed to outgrow. And for a while, you believed them. You believed that maybe if you felt less, you'd suffer less. That maybe if you hardened, you'd finally be safe. But no matter how hard you tried to armor up, your heart refused to close. Because your heart wasn't made to protect you from pain. Your heart was made to pierce through deception. You were born with spiritual intelligence that expresses itself through emotion. You don't just hear words, you feel truth. You don't just see people, you feel who they are beneath their layers. You don't just pick up on energy, you carry the power to transmute it. That is why they tried to shut down your sensitivity. Because when you feel everything, you see everything. And when you see everything, you cannot be controlled. Your heart has always been your compass, and now it's being reactivated, not for survival, but for assignment. The sensitivity you once hated is now the reason you sense danger before it arrives. The softness you once buried is now the reason people feel safe when they're near you. The depth you tried to suppress is now the very thing heaven uses to draw people out of their cycles and into healing. You are no longer ashamed of your empathy. You are now entrusted with it. You don't just love, you intercede. You don't just care, you break chains. You don't just feel, you carry frequency that calls people back to the truth of who they are. This is why it hurt when people took advantage of your kindness. This is why betrayal cut so deep, because your love was real. But don't regret the depth of your heart. That depth is what makes you unstoppable, not in battle, but in restoration. You are not dangerous because of how hard you can fight. You are dangerous because of how deeply you can see and still choose to love. You carry the ability to stand in front of a person who's pretending and not call them out with accusation, but call them higher with presence. And now that your empathy is no longer bleeding for those who use it, your heart is becoming precise. Your boundaries are becoming firm. And that combination, that's lethal to every system built on emotional manipulation. You no longer allow access to those who drain you. You no longer carry people who refuse to walk. You no longer pour where there is no willingness to receive. You've learned that protecting your heart is not selfish, it is sacred. Because your heart is no longer just a place of feeling. Your heart is now a throne where wisdom sits. This is why you must guard it, not out of fear, but out of reverence. You are no longer the emotional sponge. You are now the mirror. And mirrors don't absorb, they reveal. Let those who are ready stand before you and see themselves. Let those who are not walk away. Either way, your heart stays clear. Not cold, not calloused, clear. Because your empathy is no longer in the hands of those who want to use it. It is now in the hands of the one who gave it to you, and through it, you will love with precision, heal with presence, and walk with the kind of quiet strength that makes every room remember what real feels like again. You were never imagining it. The dreams, the patterns, the visions, the feelings you couldn't explain but could never ignore, they weren't random. They were messages in a language the world never taught you how to read. You were always being spoken to, always being prepared, always being shown things ahead of their time. But because no one around you knew how to translate it, they told you it meant nothing. They told you it was just your mind, just fantasy, just a dream. But chosen ones don't dream like everyone else. When the world sleeps, chosen ones receive symbols, images, flashbacks from places they've never been, but somehow remember. Warnings wrapped in metaphor, encounters soaked in light, conversations that feel more real than anything daylight ever brought. You weren't making them up. You were being trained. You were being aligned. You were being shown glimpses of timelines before you had the wisdom to walk them. And now that your spirit is fully awake, those dreams, those visions are beginning to sharpen again. They feel louder now, don't they? More vivid, more urgent, because the veil between the seen and the unseen is thin for those who are walking in divine timing. You are no longer watching your dreams from the outside. You are now being invited to live the very reality heaven whispered to you in silence. Every time you felt something before it happened, that was spiritual intelligence. Every time your body warned you but your logic talked you out of it, that was divine protection. Every time a symbol returned again and again in your dreams, that was heaven repeating itself until you finally paid attention. And yes, people laughed. They dismissed you. They rolled their eyes when you told them your dreams felt real. But you're no longer looking for their confirmation, because now you know. What felt real was real. Maybe not in the physical realm, but in the eternal one. And that realm has always been calling to you. You weren't just born into the world, you were born between worlds. That's why you've always had one foot in the unseen. That's why silence speaks louder to you than noise. That's why your spirit wakes up when others feel nothing. You are sensitive to movement, sensitive to shifts, sensitive to frequencies that the physical eye will never detect. And that sensitivity is not a flaw. That sensitivity is a gift of spiritual intelligence, a GPS from the higher dimension that never stopped trying to guide you. Now that you are remembering, pay attention. Pay attention to the details in your dreams, the objects, the numbers, the people who appear and then vanish, the feeling you carry when you wake up. Don't dismiss them. Don't rush past them. Write them down. Sit with them. Pray over them. Ask God for interpretation. Because you are not just receiving dreams, you are receiving direction. This is not about superstition. This is about instruction. Instruction that bypasses language, that invades your rest, that imprints on your soul before your logic has time to argue. You've been guided this way before, but now you're finally aware. And awareness changes everything. The reason others can ignore these moments and you can't is because you were never wired for this world's programming. Your operating system is ancient. It runs on symbols, silence, signals, and spirit. And now that your eyes are open, the messages are multiplying. Don't fear them. Don't rationalize them away. Embrace them. Your dreams were not detours. Your visions were not distractions. They were always divine. And now that you've stopped dismissing what you see when the world sleeps, you're beginning to wake up in ways you were never taught were possible. You didn't just survive. You were preserved. Every close call, every betrayal that didn't break you, every door that slammed shut just in time, those weren't coincidences. Those were interventions. You weren't just lucky, you were guarded, watched over, protected with precision by forces the natural world cannot explain and the carnal mind cannot comprehend. You've questioned it 100 times. How did I make it through that? How did I survive when everything was set against me? Why didn't the trap work? Why didn't I lose my mind? The answer is this: you were never alone. Chosen one. Heaven covered you long before you even knew you were chosen. Long before you learned how to pray with power. Long before you understood what you carried. There was already a shield around your name. Not because you were special in the world's eyes, but because your story was not allowed to end early. You have a mission, an assignment, a role in the dismantling of darkness. And because of that, you've been watched closely, not just by enemies, but by heaven itself. Think back. How many times did things fall apart just in time to stop you from walking into something destructive? How many relationships ended without warning, only for you to see their true motives later? How many times were you pulled away from people, jobs, systems, and habits you wanted to stay in, not realizing you were being snatched from sabotage? That wasn't chance. That was strategy. And the attacks weren't random either. The warfare around your life was always precise. The pressure came exactly when you were about to step into something important. The confusion always spiked the moment you were about to see clearly. The emotional warfare, timed. The spiritual heaviness, timed. The loneliness, timed. Not to destroy you, but to sharpen you. Every season of silence didn't make you weaker. It made you less reactive, more prophetic. Every season of isolation didn't make you forgotten. It made you unreachable to what used to distract you. Because now, you don't just carry survival, you carry evidence. And that evidence walks into rooms before you do. It announces itself through the fact that you're still standing, still soft-hearted, still discerning, still dangerous to systems of deception. That's why the enemy couldn't take you out. Not because you were lucky, because you were marked. And what is marked by God cannot be cancelled by man. You weren't protected so that you could stay hidden. You were protected so that you could be prepared. You weren't preserved so you could play it safe. You were preserved so that when the real war begins, you would know how to move in silence, how to discern in chaos, and how to stand without shaking. You didn't survive by accident, you survived on purpose. And now, that purpose is rising in your bones. You can feel it. You can feel that this next chapter is different, that you're not just healing anymore. You're ready, not because you feel fearless, but because now you understand who's been walking with you the whole time. You are not just covered, you are commissioned. The protection wasn't just to keep you safe. It was to ensure you'd be alive to carry this light into dark places and not flinch. The silence wasn't abandonment. The stillness wasn't punishment. The absence of recognition, the distance from community, the seasons where no one seemed to see you, those weren't failures. They were protection. You were hidden, not because you were unworthy, but because you were too important to be exposed too early. Hidden like seed beneath soil, covered like fire being kindled in secret, set apart like oil waiting for its moment to be poured. Chosen one, the silence shaped you, while the noise of the world was obsessed with performing, posturing, pretending. You were being prepared. You were being deconstructed and rebuilt from the inside out. Your silence was not wasted time. Your silence was construction time. Heaven was peeling off layers that didn't belong to you, voices that never spoke truth over you, beliefs that had nothing to do with who you really are. The stripping felt brutal, but the silence made space for the real you to grow. They thought the silence broke you, but it sharpened you. They thought your quietness meant you had lost your voice, but in that quietness your voice was being tuned to a frequency that cuts through illusions. They thought your delay meant defeat, but in that delay, your discernment was maturing into something no counterfeit can mimic. You've learned how to live without the applause. You've learned how to walk without constant validation. You've learned how to trust your spirit more than you trust your feelings. And that's why you're dangerous now, because you're no longer reactive. You're refined. Now your voice carries weight because it's not desperate to be heard. Now your presence holds power because it's not trying to impress. It simply reveals what's real. People used to wonder where you went, why you pulled back, why you vanished. But the truth is, you didn't disappear. You were being concealed. You weren't disconnected. You were being aligned. And now, you are emerging from that silence with a presence that cannot be ignored. This is what happens when someone chooses to stay in the hidden place long enough to be healed, instead of rushing out half-formed. This is what happens when a soul values truth over attention, depth over performance, clarity over comfort. You were hidden because you weren't ready to carry what you now carry. But now, the stillness has served its purpose. The hiddenness has done its work, and what once looked like delay is about to become your greatest distinction. Because when God hides someone, it's never to diminish them. It's to preserve the weight of their voice for the moment when it matters most. And that moment is here. You were never meant to belong. You were designed to stand. The ache you've felt all your life, that quiet hunger for connection, for understanding, for someone to look at you and get it, that ache wasn't a flaw. That ache was a compass, a constant reminder that your home was never meant to be a physical place, a social group, or a label. You were never here to fit in. You were here to remind others that they were never meant to settle either. They told you you'd be more lovable if you were softer, more acceptable if you were quieter, easier to keep around if you were less intense, less discerning, less raw. But what they really meant was, you make me confront myself, and I'm not ready for that. So they pushed, they ghosted, they labeled, they mocked, and you wondered if maybe it was you. Maybe you really were too much. But now you see it clearly. You weren't too much. You were just too alive in a world that trains people to be numb. You weren't rejected. You were revealing. And people aren't used to that, because revelation demands change, and most would rather label the light as dangerous than admit the darkness needs to leave. That's why you felt alone in rooms full of people. That's why your presence made others squirm, even when you said nothing. That's why you've always sensed that your spirit was not here to be held. It was here to hold the line. And now you no longer apologize for being the one who doesn't blend. You no longer shrink just to stay invited. You don't chase seats at tables built on shallow conversation and mutual illusions. You understand, I am not made to belong, I am made to become. You are not the guest anymore. You are the gate, the reminder, the one who walks in silence and makes souls wake up. Not with noise, not with performance, but with unshakable alignment. And alignment will always isolate before it activates. Alignment will strip before it solidifies. Alignment will prune before it promotes. So no, you're not surrounded, but you're secure. You may be walking alone, but you're walking on purpose. And soon you'll realize the ones who are assigned to your frequency will find you. Not because you asked, not because you begged, but because your very existence echoes something they buried in themselves. And when they hear it, they will recognize you, not by name, but by essence. Because the truly awakened don't follow crowds, they follow truth. And you are now truth in motion. Let others keep searching for somewhere to belong. You've realized you were never supposed to belong, because you were always meant to lead. You've searched long enough. You've waited, watched, questioned, hoped. You've looked for confirmation in people, in signs, in synchronicities, all the while carrying the very thing you were seeking. You are not waiting to be chosen anymore. You are the chosen one, not because of title, fame, or favor with men, but because heaven looked down at the intersection of time and eternity and said, "Send them, mark them, guard them, raise them, and when it's time, release them." And now the release has come. This is the moment your life stops being about survival. This is where the real assignment begins. This is where the preparation meets the promise. Not because you're loud, not because you're perfect, but because you're available. You've been emptied of noise, pride, dependence on external validation, and now you've become a vessel that doesn't just carry truth, you radiate it. You are no longer the one asking for a sign. You are the sign. You are no longer the one hoping someone will speak. You are the voice. You are no longer the one waiting for light. You are the lampstand, and your flame is no longer flickering. Now the world will not just see you, the world will be confronted by the evidence you carry. You are no longer defined by your trauma. You are now trusted with transformation. You no longer live bound by your past. You live as proof that resurrection is possible before the grave. That spiritual death can be reversed. That divine memory can be recovered. That truth never dies. It waits for you to return to it. And now that you have returned, nothing will be the same. Because when a chosen one stops running, stops hiding, stops shrinking, the ground begins to shake, not with fear, but with clarity. You are walking clarity now. You are embodied conviction. You are sacred defiance against every system, lie, and label that tried to keep you small. So let the world adjust. Let them misunderstand. Let them whisper and walk away. You are no longer bending to fit into their narrative. You are standing as a living contradiction to it. You are not just back, you are risen. And every step you take from this moment forward is a signal to every slumbering soul who forgot. You're not crazy. You're not alone. And you were never meant to die in silence. Your life is no longer a question, it is the answer. So go now, shine, speak, move, become the weight you carry, and never again apologize for being the proof that they can no longer ignore. If this message didn't just speak to your mind but stirred something deep in your soul, then leave a mark. Not just for you, but for every other chosen one who needs to see they're not the only one. Comment, "I am the one," if you know this wasn't just a message, this was your mirror. Comment, "I'm rising," if you feel it in your bones that this is the beginning of your movement. Comment, 999, if your silence is over and your season of stepping forward has begun. Then share this message, not because it's content, but because it's confirmation. You were never meant to live invisible. You were meant to be the reminder that light still walks among us. And now the world will feel you.